Hello again. Welcome back to our little series on leadership. And we've been particularly focusing in the last few videos on mentoring, looking at the relationship between Ruth and Naomi. We're going to continue gleaning one or two things about nurturing leaders through that wonderful book of Ruth. The third thing I want us to think about now is mentoring people, mentoring the younger generation through culture and ethics. There's an interesting passage in Ruth chapter 3 verses 1 to 4. Basically, what we're told there is that Naomi becomes a matchmaker. She becomes one who begins to see the potential that Boaz would be interested in Ruth. And so she tells Ruth how to go about it. And she says she needs to prepare herself and use the finest oils and the moisturizer creams and the finest perfumes. And then she's to go at night when he's asleep, and she's to lay her head on his feet. And we're told that Boaz wakes up and thanks her for this amazing favor that she's showing him, because essentially this is a marriage proposal. Ruth is saying, I want to be your wife. Now, I don't know where you live or what your culture is, but certainly in my culture, this isn't how we propose. In my culture, in my day and age anyway, it was expected that the man would propose to the woman, not the other way around, except on Valentine's Day, where traditionally a woman could propose to a man if she wanted to, if the man was being lazy or dragging his feet. But certainly we wouldn't have anything like this in our culture, where we would go and a woman would lay her head on the feet of a man in the middle of the night. Nothing sexual going on there, nothing inappropriate going on there, but basically saying, I want to marry you. And I don't know how that is in your culture, but certainly for Ruth, she had never come across this either. This was something that Naomi knew about the culture in which she herself had been raised, and about how to approach the subject of marriage. Now, putting the marriage point aside, what is happening here is Naomi, who has experience of how things are done, how culture works, how things should happen, she instructs her young protege in how to navigate the culture and the ethics of the situation. She doesn't say to her, remember the daughters of Lot. It's recorded for us there in the book of Genesis, who were worried that they were never going to have children, so they got their own father drunk and then both slept with him on subsequent nights, fell pregnant with his children, which is incest. It's not a good way to get children. She doesn't say that to Ruth. She says, this is how you do it with integrity. Remember last video that we talked about integrity? This is an application of that. And so Ruth does what she's told. She doesn't add to it. She doesn't subtract to it. She says, this is something that is going to speak the language of love in the culture in which I'm now living. And she goes ahead and she does that. And Boaz responds positively to that. You see, trying to bring about a spiritual inheritance by taking shortcuts will never pay off. Trying to bring about God's plan for your life by cutting corners is never going to pay off. And so as you're being mentored by someone, or as you're mentoring someone yourself, don't try and cut corners. Don't try and say this is going to be a shortened process because this person that I'm mentoring is better looking than other people, or is funnier than other people, or seems to know the Bible better than anybody else. Don't cut corners, because what will happen is we will trip up in culture. We will fall over ourselves. I come from a culture where you show friendship and respect and acceptance by calling people by their first name, by their Christian name, as we would call it. When we came to move into South Africa, we came back to a country that we had lived in previously, and we came to a part of the country where we had not lived previously. And the lady that was teaching us language and helping us with that explained to us that to show appreciation and respect within the culture, you call someone by their surname, not their first name. And so I asked her, I said, well, what do your friends call you? She said, they call me by my surname. Well, then I said, well, what do your family call you? Well, they'll call me by my surname. Well, what does your husband call you? Well, he might call me by other names, but when he calls for me, he will call me by my surname. I say, what do your parents call you? She says, if I'm in trouble, they'll use my first name. Now, we all know sometimes what it's like to be in trouble. In my culture, when I was growing up, if I was in trouble, it wouldn't be Keith, come here. It would be Keith, Daniel Jackson, what have you done? You know, it would be the full Monty, it would be everything. See, cultures are different. And the culture that we are living in will trip us up. See, cultures are built on shifting sands. They do change. They ebb and they flow. What we used to do 50 years in a culture, we don't necessarily do now. Words that we used in a culture 50 years ago are unacceptable now. That's across the world. That's not just in Southern Africa. Words have changed. Just think about the word wicked. You know, when I was growing up, that meant evil. Then it went through a phase that meant something that was really, really good. Now I have no idea what wicked means because I'm just too old in some respects to catch up with these things. See, the point is, we need to nurture people not just in areas of integrity and servanthood and work ethic, as I mentioned last time. We need to also nurture them in the ways of culture. What is correct, what is not correct, what is right and what is not right. And I don't mean by that just church culture and how to do things and how to run a service or how to preach a sermon, but how to relate to culture and how to understand that the culture that we live in is always going to bow before the Word of God. You see, the Word of God is going to be above every culture. Before I became a missionary, even though I'd been a pastor of many years, even though I'd written books, even though I had theological degrees and all manner of experiences, I still had to go through a year of training, and part of that training was cultural sensitivity. And what we meant by that was, don't try and impose British culture onto the culture in which you're going to be living, but rather make sure that you explain the Word of God as culture free and as culture relevant to where you are as possible. And that's quite tricky. That's quite difficult. I'm constantly asking people close to me and my advisors and my pastors here, how do I express this? I might say something in English, it might be said like this, but how would I express that within your culture properly? See, there is the constant understanding that if we don't communicate the gospel properly through the culture in which we're living, then the gospel will always fall on deaf ears. As a mentor, it is your role to instruct those you're mentoring in the ways of culture. And if you're being mentored, if you aspire to Christian leadership, you need to understand the culture in which you are living in. Charles Spurgeon once put it like this. He was a great preacher, Baptist preacher over 100 years ago. By the age of 19, he had the largest church in the UK, if not Europe. And he said this. He said, you need to hold the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. What he was saying is, the Word of God comes first, but understand what is happening in your society and how to relate to the events and the society in which you live. And that way, we can spread the gospel more effectively.